Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's isolation video Dvar Torah. While we remain in the midst of a global pandemic that has already claimed more than 400,000 lives, we would have thought it impossible, inconceivable, that there could possibly be any other news item that would supplant COVID-19 as the leading issue to talk about. 2 weeks ago, as Jews around the world did our very best to celebrate some semblance of the Shavuot festival while maintaining our social distancing, the story about George Floyd was beginning to reach the public stage. On Wednesday, 2 weeks ago, Floyd, a 46-year-old African-American man, died while in police custody as an officer suffocated him for more than 8 minutes, kneeling on his neck. A perfectly clear video showed us all the shocking truth of the incident, as a black man on the ground gasped and pleaded with the officer for air, while 3 other officers stood by and calmly watched, as though it was all perfectly normal and reasonable. The incident took place in Minneapolis, Minnesota, but within hours, protests and rioting broke out not only in every major American city in the U.S., but also all around the world, including right here at home in Toronto. Although the officer who murdered George Floyd and the other 3 officers have all been arrested and charged, most of us recognize that this incident was only a symptom of an underlying systemic cancer that Western society has largely chosen to ignore for far too long: racism. Similar tragedies have happened in our history that have sparked similar outcry, but for whatever reason, maybe because we've all been cooped up in our homes for so long, or maybe because the American government response to the protesting so poetically seemed to just prove the point over and over, it seems like the Black Lives Matter movement is gaining some real traction that could affect some radical change, not just in the US, but here in Toronto too. And while this may seem to some of us that this is solely a matter for the black community to deal with, and that the Jews should be on the sidelines, let me assure you that it is not. With that, I'd like to talk about, first, what Jewish ideology has to say about this. Second, why this is an absolutely relevant matter for the Jewish community to weigh in on. And finally, how we as Jews should be participating in this movement to enact important changes in how our society works. We're going to begin with Jewish ideology, so let's identify the Jewish value at issue. There are many structures within our society that oppress and place barriers in the way of people of color. The official platform for the Movement for Black Lives calls for an end to the use of past criminal history to determine eligibility for housing, education, and the right to vote. More government spending on social workers and mental health experts, as an alternative to increased policing, and an end to publicly funded political campaigns that can be so easily bought by large corporations with special interests that may not reflect the will of the majority. But the hot-button issue that has brought this whole thing into focus is specifically with regard to policing and how people of color are both regarded and treated by police. Of course, the murder of George Floyd serves as a clear example, but an even more perfect demonstration of the systemic problem came from an incident only a few days prior in New York City. A white woman was walking her dog, unleashed, in Central Park. When an African-American man asked her to leash her dog, an argument ensued, leading to the woman threatening to call the police, specifically saying that she intended to claim, and I quote, "There's an African-American man threatening my life." This altercation was also captured on video, where we see how at least one person seems to have a thorough understanding that a claim like this against an African American will place them in serious jeopardy when the authorities arrive. And more than that, that it can be, and is in this case, leveraged by someone who holds what we call white privilege. In this case, meaning the benefit that comes with the knowledge that a first responder's initial reaction to this scenario will be far more likely to favor a white woman than a black man. And, due to racial bias, a black man in this case has a much greater likelihood of being arrested, beaten, or even killed before the truth even comes to light. That's assuming it does at all. When we see that the rules of our society can be so easily bent or even broken in order to serve one group at the expense of another, we lose our faith in the rules. In Judaism, we simply call these rules Torah. And as Jews, we have to believe that Torah is incorruptible. We have to have faith in Torah. We have to have faith in the rules. Can we possibly imagine what would become of Judaism if we suddenly lost our faith in the rules? And of course, Torah comes from God, so if we lose our faith in Torah, it would have to mean also that we've lost our faith in God. In our parsha this week, Beha'alotcha, Moses is beginning to feel the full weight of the burden of his leadership. God agrees to divide his load among 70 elders of Israel, and the Torah describes how God's Spirit came to rest upon the 70 elders, who begin to speak in ecstasy. Delighted, Moses says, Umi yiten kol am Adonai nevi'im, ki yiten Adonai et rucho alehem. If only it could be that all God's people were prophets, that God would put his Spirit upon all of them. Sure, wouldn't it be great if every Israelite was a prophet and a saint? Then Moses wouldn't even have to lead at all. But that's not really how it works. We aren't all prophets and saints, and that's the point. We're supposed to have faith in God, faith in Torah, faith in the rules, because people are fallible. And the rules are supposed to help us keep the balance, despite our fallibility, by being equally applicable to us all. But if you live in a system where the rules are as corruptible as people, and neither can be counted upon to bring balance, then it suddenly becomes so easy for us to understand why someone would say, well, then to hell with all the rules, because none of them would have any value at all. And that's when you get the rioting, looting, and the destruction that we've seen. To those people, Torah is dead. And it's society's fault for killing it, not theirs. Rioting, looting, and destruction is merely the inevitable consequence of the death of Torah. But why, you ask, should the Jewish community be involved? After all, this issue centers around the black community, so it should be upon them to address it with the government. Well, we might as well acknowledge that racism not only affects the black community, but all people of color. But yes, it does center around the black community, and they should and are addressing it with our governments. But we as Jews ought to be standing by them as they do so. Historically, the black and Jewish communities have often stood together on matters of social justice. Although it is inappropriate to compare the way in which black people have been victimized throughout history to the way the Jewish people have, our communities both understand what it means to be oppressed, brutalized, and murdered on account of being born who we are. We are both extremely proud of our respective heritages. They fill us with meaning, purpose, and spirit, and it offends us to our core to be persecuted and victimized because of it. It's for this reason that one of the 20th century's greatest leaders of the Jewish conservative movement, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, marched beside Martin Luther King in Selma, March 7, 1965, the day that would come to be known as Bloody Sunday. When we hear news that a synagogue has been vandalized with a swastika spray painted on the wall and we scream anti-Semitism at the top of our lungs, so too when we see injustices committed against our black brothers and sisters because of their race, we should be screaming, Black Lives Matter. This brings us to our final point, which is, what do we do about this as Jews? It has been suggested that the official organization known as the Movement for Black Lives is anti-Israel, and that the Jewish community, while believing in the cause, cannot support the organization. If you Google the name of the organization right now with the word Israel beside it, you will see a number of articles that refer to the organization's original 2016 Cleveland platform, which included a statement as follows, quote, "The U.S. justifies and advances the global war on terror via its alliance with Israel and is complicit in the genocide taking place against the Palestinian people. Additionally, it also states that Israel is an apartheid state with over 50 laws on the books that sanction discrimination against the Palestinian people." End quote. When the platform was released to the public, there came an immediate backlash from the Jewish community, wondering why on earth, with so much history of common sensitivities, goals, and spirit of cooperation between the Jewish and black communities, why would they turn their backs on us? It was soon after revealed that this particular segment of the platform was developed by a small team of just 3 people, which included someone with direct ties to the BDS movement, and that the platform had been ratified without being properly scrutinized. Statements regarding Israel were immediately removed from the official Movement for Black Lives platform. Now, does this mean that there aren't members of the organization who are decidedly against Israel? Of course not. But, as an organization, the Movement for Black Lives has nothing to do with Israel or Palestinians. And it is just as important for us to realize that for the vast, overwhelming majority of our black brothers and sisters who are at long last starting to see a glimmer of hope that our society might actually start seriously addressing long overdue issues that have put the proverbial knee in their necks, the last thing they are thinking about is how to solve peace in the Middle East. There is no excuse. The Jews are not a monolithic people, and we should, all of us, be able to identify with this struggle. It's a just cause, and if we are to be a light unto the nations, we cannot sit on the sidelines lest our light go out. We owe it to our friends in the black community, we owe it to the world, and we owe it to ourselves to have these hard conversations, to support the movement with our words and our resources, and to advocate for change. Shabbat Shalom.